I think Steven Spielberg was also somebody who achieved well to connect entertainment and edutainment kind of thing. So, his movies are wise and at the same time very entertaining. So there are millions of people going to the cinema and going like, wow, this was a fun movie. At the same time, at least some of them are going quite deep into subjects.
You see, that's the secret of science. So I would call him a very big scientist. Otherwise he couldn't have done it.
That is a very, very good point. I mean, what is science actually? We were talking about Mandela, now we're talking about Spielberg. What is the definition of science, Otto? Who is a scientist and who is not? If I am discovering something while I'm cooking, and I'm doing this experiment with different ingredients, and I go like, I've never had such a fantastic taste before. Am I a scientist?
You see, the real scientists are the children.
Discovering.
And some of us are allowed to remain children and stupid. And only if you know you are stupid, you are as modest as a child is, and thereby you lose having to be afraid, strangely. I'm concerned about the fate of Putin at the moment. He disappeared, I was told.
Well, some people say his young new model wife was pregnant and got a new child in Lugano.
So let's hope
he would maybe sit on the lake of Lugano and sip some champagne and laugh about people being afraid.
And maybe we can win him over that he agrees to planetary elections. His voice might be able to get into the footsteps of Mandela. I mean, it's a chance.
Well, this is an interesting subject because in the Putin case, there are like two people, and one says Putin is a good guy, and the other says Putin is a nutcase.
I know, yes. It's like with Napoleon.
Yes.
I always wondered why Napoleon and Goethe, the big poet, were so close. When Napoleon saw Goethe, he said, "Voilà un homme." So Napoleon was able to appreciate the most intelligent person of German tongue so far, apart from Einstein.
Well, isn't it that many powerful politicians, they border a bit on the craziness? It's a bit like,
they're not afraid.
Great visions, big ideas, but then it's quickly done, and you say like, I can do it all, right?
They have no friends, you see. That's the real problem. Yes.
Well, Putin must have still some friends at the Secret Service, no? Or from his ex-work.
But you see, Snowden also is in this category of people, Secret Service people.
Yes.
And nonetheless, he's a hero.
Yes.
Also.
Yes. Well, again, this is a controversial subject. I was talking to ex-Secret Service people or ex-government people. They said to me, he is a traitor. He should be going to prison. And of course, there are many people that say he's a hero. Yes.
It can happen, yes. That both definitions are true. And certainly Snowden would agree to having broken law in the interest of higher law.
Yes.
And so there's the question, whether it's true that there are some things like human rights, which would be above the law or not. And of course, nations cannot allow that, because there are other nations and there might be war, and that might be deadly to do that. But as soon as we have the Mandela planet, suddenly it would no longer be dangerous to be a traitor like Snowden and be just a hero at the same time.
And there is actually, I think it's even somewhere in the US Constitution or law, but it's understood globally, I think, a bit that being a citizen in a country does not only always mean to follow orders, but sometimes it's also your duty to say no, or to say to become a whistleblower, or to work against orders. For example, if I imagine I would have been living in Germany during the Hitler time, and they would have asked me to shoot some people or gas some people. it would have been my obligation to say no, but it would have been against the law at the same time.
Absolutely, yes.
Against current law.
Yeah, and of course one can also understand that singing the national anthem really has a very deep meaning, a religious meaning to the people. and so I understand both sides. I understand the people who criticize Snowden and find him to be a criminal, and people who say he belongs in the category you just described. And the United Nations could give him a status. They're not allowed yet to give any person such a status, as far as I know.
Yes.
But that would be the solution.
I was impressed. I recently watched a documentary done by Boitras, documentary filmmaker. She's living in New York, and this documentary won recently the Oscar at the film festival for the best documentary, and it is about Snowden, Citizenship 4 or something like that. And in this documentary, I mean also in other interviews, but in this documentary, which actually I can only recommend, is nice quality, Snowden says something like, and I did this for my country. So I mean, his point of view is I had to protect my country. So he still seems to be working in the mindset of a Secret Service employee. Only now he says what they're doing is against my country, because when you work for an organization like that, at some point you have to make a kind of oath and say, I will do everything to protect my country's interest.
Exactly. Yes.
And suddenly he seemed to be, for himself, realizing that what the NSA did was against the own country's or the public's interest. So in his view, he did this out of, loyalty for his own country.
But you see, one can also say, as from the point of view of that country and government, that as long as this country is still being threatened by other countries, it cannot allow the luxury to people to think not patriotically. And so Snowden is really a citizen of the future, not of the present. And in the future, he has always been loyal to America, to the US, I'm sure.
That's a very nice to put it. A very nice way to put it out. I don't want to go too far into that area, but let's just maybe for 1-2 seconds discuss another person, Julian Assange, who is currently still a good 2 years at the Ecuadorian embassy in London, who I would also much like to interview in the next few months. Who now he was in a kind of legal trouble with Sweden because they said he raped somebody. Well, basically the definition of rape in that case is that he forced a woman to sleep with him without using condoms, which is in Sweden constitutes kind of statutory rape. And the point, just the thing I wanted to mention is that in the meantime, now Sweden always had said he needs to come out of the London embassy, come to Sweden. If not, we will not go forward with this. And now Sweden has agreed to send somebody to London and interview him concerning that complaint in the embassy. Which Assange must be quite relieved for this, because he is afraid that once he is in Sweden, Sweden will give him to the US and there he will spend the rest of his days in prison. What do you think about what Julian Assange has done, and what do you think about his current position?
I mean, he is obviously very close to Snowden, whom we discussed already. And he's also a very charismatic person. He
is, I've met him in Geneva, and he is definitely a charismatic person, yes.
And his motivations are pure, I'm sure. And so I would pledge that he should also be given the status of a non-national on the planet, who is allowed to think of the interests of the bigger community, even though, again, it is true, he violated laws in one nation. And so it's very, as long as the planet is not ready to introduce the voting laws of Mandela, the planet is kind of responsible for the cruelty that is being done to such people.
Correct. Yeah. Correct. Yeah.
And that people have the courage to be to be so Jesus-like, like Hawking again, is very very intimidating.
I mean, we also have to say that while Assange is in the embassy, another person, which was very main person in WikiLeaks, Chelsea Manning, the soldier who has become a woman in the meantime, is imprisoned for, I think, over 30 years in a military prison for the information he has leaked to WikiLeaks. Or she has leaked to WikiLeaks. So I think this person is actually paying an even higher price.
Right.
Yeah.
And soon an American singer will come to Tübingen, the most famous one. What's his name?
The American singer?
Yeah, the most famous American singer.
Elvis Presley.
No, he's no longer alive. Yes, but I agree. I would agree with Elvis, but he's still living. Bob Dylan.
Bob Dylan. Yeah, Bob Dylan. In modern times, it's the last CD I heard from him.
Yeah,
yes.
So this is the place where Bob Dylan will be singing soon, where we have this interview.
That's nice. I like that. I like that also. Going back to the CERN, I was recently working in Zurich, and a very good colleague of me explained me, I wasn't talking with him about the CERN, I didn't mention one word, I swear, but this colleague suddenly said, at the CERN, when they have important meetings, there's always a member of the US military present and a member of the US Secret Service, of the CIA present at each meeting. Is that a surprise to you, Otto?
No, I mean, every country that has a certain dignity should have a Secret Service man there.
So the Swiss don't
They certainly have also,
okay.
yes.
Okay. Why? If I may ask, why?
No, I mean, the whole thing is too important.
But, I mean, for me it's a bit contradictory. On one side the CERN says, no, we will never do anything that could in any way be used, I don't know, anything big, to make it small in a way. And on the other side, what could be interesting for the military and the Secret Service there? I don't get it.
No, it has been a military endeavor from the beginning. It was it was in the interest of both superpowers to have such a meeting ground where they could somehow hope to leak or get leaked information which could be decisive for survival of one of them. That was really, that was such. One doesn't understand anymore how close the planet was to mutual extinction at the time.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
And it is, and there is one science called astronomy. And I was once told by a professional astronomer in a university that this science has every document on the internet, and it is well founded on the planet, because every astronomical project is at the same time a military project. So it's wonderful to have astronomy, and it's wonderful that it helps the military, and it's wonderful to have CERN, and it's wonderful that it helps the military. But this is not an aggressive statement of mine. If anyone understands it in this way, I would take it back. It is natural, it is logical. One shouldn't be angry with people who love weapons physics. I like them. They're children. And you see, the nicest children, the nicest people to talk to is military people in times of peace. You realize they are really playful human beings. They are grown-up boys, grown-up little girls with courage. and so I love the military, as long as it doesn't become serious, as long as it's police-type game.
Yeah. Yes.
Police is I could love police, even if they sometimes have to arrest someone.
Yes.
They don't have an evil spirit.
That is true. Yeah, I agree with that. It's a good statement. Otto, a few years ago, when we had the last interview, I believe it was just before the interview, there was this big media action about the CERN black holes because suddenly your theory or theorem became interesting to the media, and then there was a lot of reporting, and most media said tomorrow it will be the end of the world because Otto Roessler said so. And we both know that's completely wrong as a statement. But at the same time, a 12-year-old girl in India has committed suicide because she was so afraid of the world being finished tomorrow. We both felt really bad during that interview about this action of her. What do you think are the reasons for the media to report false information in regard to the CERN?
They didn't report false information, they just reported truncated information.
Yes, very truncated.
Yeah. And this always can happen. It usually happens with the media. So that's a law of nature, that if the media gets something onto something, then it will be distorted in many ways, and you cannot prevent such things. But it is very, very sad, of course.
For me, Otto, just it felt a bit orchestrated because all the media outlets reported this.
Yeah.
And at the same time, I also got a call from the Swiss TV that they want to do a discussion round on the CERN LHC, and I should be there at 6 o'clock in the afternoon. And 20 minutes before it started, they called and said it's cancelled.
Yeah. I had the same experience with the Swiss president. I was invited. It was cancelled. Actually, I was never told it was cancelled.
Who was the Swiss president at that time, just to tell
I took the freedom to forget his name. It was in 2008.
Was it Otto Stich? No,
in 2008, it's easy to find out.
Yeah, of course, yes. We should know, that's all, huh? We get a minus point for that. Yes. Yeah. So in a way, how this thing developed with the media and all, I also found it a bit strange. You think there was
it's rational
pressure on people not to report certain things?
You see, it all depends on whether you believe that there is a theorem or not. And if the theorem has a small circle of people who have understood it, then it has no chance to... it's ridiculous. It's only in science that a ship's boy is allowed to say, I see an iceberg. In no other profession can you do that. And so the public doesn't know that such can happen. And it doesn't know that sometimes a ship's boy has to be taken seriously. There are professional ship's boys.
Yeah, that's true.
And
I
found better theorems in the meantime.
I would like to ask a bit of personal question, because I feel the years pass in my life. Some years have passed since I was at the last interview, and sometimes I've asked myself questions about how is it to get old. How does it feel to get old? How does it feel for you? You told me in the car, I think, or before we went to the car, you said to me, at the end of life, before we go, we still have this huge push of energy, it seems, and we look much younger than ever, kind of, because this seems to be happening to you. You look like a baby.
My friend Konrad Lorenz had a technical term for that. In German it is called Altersprachtkleid.
Wow, Altersprachtkleid. Das ist wirklich eine we need to think about that. Yes. We will make subtitles with a long word.
But and if your memory is fading, you can have clearer thoughts, you see, because not so much is interfering.
That could be true. Yeah, I agree.
Also, you have not much to lose. You see, you can be benevolent, and people might even believe you.
Yes.
There's no reason to believe a younger person to be benevolent. He might have reasons, secondary reasons.
Yes.
Old people, if they're benevolent, okay, it might be a trick of theirs to be remembered nicely.
Yeah.
But actually, I think most old people are benevolent. Society doesn't know that. It forgot it.
That's true.
So old age doesn't have no dignity because people don't know anymore how kind people get when they are old.
Yes, because they get maybe less selfish.
Yeah.
They need to accept that life is limited in size.
They're not just stupid.
And
the only explanation to explain their stupidity is their kindness. And no one knows it. It's like with the young children. They are much, much kinder than the older children or the adults.
But traditional societies used often to have this kind of what they called Älterenrat, or no, the council of the old or stuff like that. And that doesn't exist anymore, right?
Yeah,
apart from the queens or the kings, maybe they are allowed to get old, and then sometimes somebody listens still to them. But often old people nowadays, they go in horrible houses, and you let them die there. No?
They get into a machinery.
Yeah. Which again is a contradiction to, for example, Google's president or somebody there said yesterday that human beings are soon going to live 500 years. I don't know if that's true, but what would be the benefit of living 500 years if nobody wants you?
Yeah.
No?
Unless people realize that having had more experiences sometimes pays to be learned about by young people. So young people can appreciate older people, especially if they are honest about their deficits.
Absolutely. I remember sitting in Basel at a tram station, and there was this really quiet old woman, and we started talking, and in 10 minutes she told me so many interesting things, and
women
it needed a word from me, an incitation, because sometimes these people are just afraid to talk. They say, I start to talk, and they will say, don't what do you say, don't take my time away, got other things to do, and they themselves, they don't realize maybe anymore that they've got something interesting to say.
And if you have a profession like in the universities, one has the big luck that one has young people to talk to. And one can, so it is still possible to, if you don't use computers anymore, as I do, except for email, then you can compete with young minds, and you learn things like
Now a very indiscreet question, Otto. How old are you?
I get 75 in 2 months' time.
And you're still working at the university?
Yeah.
How do you enjoy it to work with young people?
No, it's the greatest honor one can be given.
Sorry, somebody else.
Okay.
But it happens quite often that people decide for some sickness or for some other situation in life that they don't want to continue. And I personally, my position there is it's everybody's free will.
Yeah, but I have a friend who is strongly advocating against signing that you don't want to be revived or so when you have a stroke or something, because he has many patients who had such a fate and who cannot talk anymore except to him, because he has the machines to do it, a machine like this one, so to speak, and he found out they want to live, but they cannot communicate. And then they have to listen how the relatives say he or she shouldn't suffer anymore, let us switch off, and they are crying now, and no one knows it except Niels Bierbaumer. He's a hero. He's a holy man in my eyes, because he saves people from being murdered successfully. And
I mean, this is again a very controversial subject. This whole we in Switzerland, we are quite open on this. Now we have these organizations like Dignitas or Exit, which allow people to to finish off their life in certain situations. And we also got quite heavy tourism coming to Switzerland. People, for example, from England come because they want to die with us. And of course, this is a controversial subject. I mean, also when we talk about anesthesia, is that correct?
Yeah,
English, Then, then I mean, eugenics. It gets us reminded of certain historical facts, and the main question is then, will society come at the point where they will say, oh, these people at these elderly homes, they need to commit suicide now because they're too old and they're too expensive for society?
Aldous Huxley, Brave New World, has this already in it, yes.
Exactly. So it's a controversial question, as another question which I think you talk about in the book Chaotic Harmony, which is, I think you talk about this one in your interviews also, it's about artificial intelligence, right?
Yeah.
Can you tell us anything about this subject?
It's very kind of you to touch it. I had hoped it would come up, but I hadn't thought it would be possible.
It comes.
I have a method how to turn elephants into persons. And that would be artificial intelligence, but on the level of a superhuman intelligence. It would not be silicon. It could also be done with silicon later, but at the moment it could be done to date with elephants or with dolphins. Gottfried Meyer-Kress, a friend who unfortunately.
How would you do that, if I may ask?
Yeah, it's by means of understanding my smile theory.
Okay.
So the smile theory is the most difficult theory I ever developed. It was also the first. No, it was the second. I should.
Tell me more about the smile theory also.
It's very dangerous.
Is it more dangerous than black holes at this CERN?
Yeah.
So there is something more dangerous than black holes.
It's dangerous in a good sense, you see.
Well, black holes at the CERN are dangerous in bad sense.
Unfortunately. Unless someone finds a counter theorem to mine, which I hope. Yeah.
So what makes the theory of the smile so dangerous?
Because understanding love is dangerous. People are afraid of understanding love.
Because?
It's so close to religion.
And why would that be dangerous?
Yeah, I mean, when I was there, quite young, 17 or something, I thought I had to become a monk, but I didn't want to. I was afraid. So I had the call, so to speak, and I was not strong enough to follow the call. I was quite grateful to my father for forbidding me to become a monk.
Well, I can imagine loneliness, no girls, no?
Yeah, but you see,
lots of praise all the time.
There's a lot of temptation in religion. It's the most tempting subject of all of them. People forgot that. They don't know anymore how sweet. I wouldn't call it a poison, but there is also an intelligence behind religion that is much deeper than scientific intelligence. And people know that. People wouldn't go to church if they didn't know. Of course, the numbers are declining, but some other churches are coming up.
Correct. Yeah.
So humankind is much more intelligent than its science, and the science is.
But now I need to find the connection between
smile.
The theory of the smile and relations.
I forgot. Yeah. And children, young children, you see, children are nowadays a subject of sexual, how should I say, discussions.
Yeah.
Everybody thinks children and sexuality have something to do with each other. And very strange.
That's true.
But really, there is one species of humans called females. Now I'm saying something impossible. Sigmund Freud talked of the polymorphically perverse nature of the female. So females love children, you see. that's dangerous, and it gives them a kind of orgasm if they are breastfeeding. It's oxytocin. Oxytocin use is dangerous. There's a spray, you can get it, you know. People don't know it. It's nice to use oxytocin, but you love your friends more and you hate your enemies more if you take. Sorry.
Now, is this a company that is in the breastplate?
Yeah.
No. Yes?
Yeah. I mean, in the body of the woman, of the mother, and it's making the milk shoot.
Okay.
And it's also in orgasm. The main element is oxytocin.
That is very interesting. Oxytocin.
Oxytocin with a C.
Oxytocin. That could be the next Red Bull.
What is Red Bull?
It's a drink that gives you drinks.
Yeah, it is. It always has been this Red Bull. Yes, yes.
The CERN LHC will be turned on again, as you mentioned before, sometimes in May, I think, this year. More powerful than ever.
I know. It will be turned on this month, but the collisions will start in May, on 8th of May, yes.
What feeling do you have about this?
No, I'm still optimistic. I believe that CERN will realize that there is an atmosphere of mutual benevolence in which one could discuss the safety of the LHC. And I got an offer from CERN young scientists in 2010 in January, or was it February, to give a talk before them. And then I got a letter from the boss of CERN that he does not allow this talk to take place.
You still have that letter, may I ask?
On email. I should have it somewhere, yes.
If you can send that to me, I would like to present it. Yeah.
Okay.
Do you know who's the leader, by chance, of these young scientists?
No, I didn't know. I was. I had visited CERN. I was standing at the bus station waiting to leave.
In Geneva, yeah.
Yeah, I was allowed to see the machine and so on.
The tunnel.
Yeah. And a young man was standing there, and we came into a discussion, and he was a member of the CERN Young Scientists. He invited me for a talk. I found it interesting, and I got this official invitation.
I remember when I was living,
maybe, yes.
When I was living in Geneva with my daughter sometimes couldn't sleep because there was this hum. We actually found out later that we lived straight above the tunnel, and
you are one of the few people on the planet who lived right.
That's what made me impressed in the CERN, this hum, you know, I was like, what is this? And a few years later I went to Geneva, and there was a restaurant. I was talking with somebody about that, and there were two children present, and they instantly said, yeah, I have that too, and you can hear that too. What's that? Oh.
You need very fine ears, yes.
Okay.
Nice. Yeah, and children are, of course, quite different than adults. People forgot that.
Absolutely.
They are the higher human species. I used to say, with Konrad Lorenz's approval, that in 1,000 years, now he said Walt Disney will be the most famous artist in 1,000 years, and children will be much higher than adults in the hierarchy, and rightly so.
That's an interesting point,
But the smile was the topic. The smile has two meanings. It means friendly smile, or you see,
like a mad scientist smile.
And happy smile, and happiness, and of course, if the scientist is wrongly happy for wrong reasons, it's also a smile, and then it's dangerous. Yes, maybe my smile is dangerous.
I believe if you have seen also the movie Roger Rabbit, by chance. No, it's a drawn movie, a comics movie, and there's this scene where Roger Rabbit, there is this mad scientist who, I think he has had some bad experiences with cartoon characters, and now he wants to eliminate all cartoon characters, and he has this big pot, huge pot with some grey-greenish fluid, and if you draw a cartoon character into that pot, it dissolves completely. And so there's this key scene in the movie where he tries to put Roger Rabbit and his girlfriend with huge boobs in that pot. And he has this very special smile on his face while he does that, and his eyes which go round in circles like, hypnosis eyes. And this reminds me of my theory.
Roger Rabbit, you said.
Roger Rabbit. It's actually quite a nice movie. Everybody is so ecological today and green.
Yeah.
That the CERN consumes the same energy than half the city of Geneva. We're talking quite a big city. Geneva is quite a big city. When in operation, does not seem to generate any discussions. How can you explain this?
No, that's natural. People living near the Vesuvius mountain will also not discuss eruptions.
But they could say, why are we driving bicycles, and why are we using public transport, and why are we putting our waste in the right box, and the CERN can consume so much energy.
Yeah. But as soon as there's no proof that what CERN is doing is dangerous, one cannot object to it. And I have this proof, but I want this proof to be checked. And this is, and the proof is easy, but unfortunately the proof goes back to Einstein 1907. So it digs deeply into a version of Einstein that most specialists are not aware of anymore, because this is not part of the canon. But it's very easy to explain.
I got a call from ProSieben. This is a big German TV channel, and they want to publish excerpts of my interview with Gabriele Schroeter in a science medium they have called Galileo.
Galileo is a very nice science medium. Very, the people there are very devoted. Wonderful. Yes.
And so there seems to be increased media interest again on the CERN LHC.
Yeah, automatically.
Why do you think so?
Yeah, I mean, this is part of CERN's effort to get more visibility. And so CERN is paying for this criticism towards CERN because it raises the level of consciousness in the public.
Why don't they pay us then?
No, that's not the way journalists are being treated.
I'm sorry. The CERN LHC is not only the largest machine ever built by humankind, but also the most expensive one. Financed mainly by European nations and, of course, by European taxpayers. In these times of economical crisis, don't you find it surprising that the CERN gets his funding, no questions asked?
No, we talked about this already. CERN is basically a military project. But
even the military doesn't get all they ask for.
But the military is, of course, a very benevolent organization. It is funding, how do you call it, this fundamental physics type stuff, in the hope that something might also fall off from this research.
Which then might fall off on the military companies, which then might make a lot of money with it.
I wonder how many Chinese are allowed to be members of CERN.
You think not many?
I'm afraid so, yes.
That's
just something I wondered, a question that came to my mind this morning.
Yeah, the Chinese seem to be more welcome when they produce computers and stuff like that than to really play as big players in the world's political strategies or scientific strategies.
But it's interesting, and I have a new theory, not about a smile. I come back to the smile in a minute. But I have a theory called cryodynamics. Cryo means cold, dynamics means dynamics. So it's the opposite to thermodynamics. Thermodynamics exists for 150 years as a wonderful theory. Cryodynamics exists for 10 years as an equally wonderful theory. It's essentially the same theory, only with a gas theory. Thermodynamics is when particles are repelling each other, and cryodynamics is when the gas is mutually attracting. So cryodynamics is a theory of galaxies in the cosmos which are a gas of galaxies. And it turns out that suddenly cryogdynamics explains the redshift of the Hubble law. So the Big Bang is suddenly gone. Which actually I plan not to mention today.
Because if we mention everything our interview may just take about 250 years, which would be nice for us. Maybe we'll survive those 250 years just because we're having so much fun. But for any listeners to this interview, would maybe a bit lengthy.
Yeah.
They would maybe tell us we have overdone it.
Yeah.
Yes.
Maybe we have.
Maybe we have already. Who knows? Yeah.
Shall I say one more word about the smile?
Yes.
Because I almost killed it. The smile in humans has two meanings. It means friendliness and it means happiness.
Yeah.
And if you're happy, others might laugh, but it doesn't mean they like you. But if you are smiling in a friendly way, and someone will be offended that you smile at him. But if the smile is really moving enough, he will smile back, and suddenly you are friends.
There's a connection.
So the smile is a rewarding, bonding type signal.
Absolutely.
And it also has the signal of just pure happiness. There's a word for that in English.
Bliss.
Or friskiness, which is more silly, so to speak. Silliness.
Friskiness.
Yeah, laughing. Yes.
Yes.
And so this feature of the human smile is shared by only one other animal.
And maybe the particles at the LHC are also in a friskiness feeling when they collide.
This is too difficult for me to touch or to understand, but it is one of the deepest questions I was ever asked at the same time. Because who knows? I mean, I recently read this book about Dirac, the strangest man, who saw another reality with the Dirac sea, so to speak. And so we never know if someone turns the world around totally enough. It ceases to be ridiculous and becomes deep.
Yes, agreed. I think this is a big...
But I come back to the smile.
Yes.
There's only one animal which has the same structure as the human face. That's the rear part of the dog. The tail wagging of the dog means happiness, friskiness, and if the dog likes you, it comes. It's not only happy, it's also showing it loves you. So, between wolves, the tail wagging means both showing good spirits and bonding. So the wolf has just the same structure with the back part of its body as humans have with the front part of their bodies. But that's why they are the best friend of humans, the dog. But no other animal has this coupling. And why? And I claim that this coupling is responsible for a child being turned into a person, for losing autism as a young age, 1.5 or so, before one remembers. And why then don't dogs or wolves become persons if they have the same misunderstanding? And if one thinks about it, if both mother and child are rewarded by the smile or the laughter of the other, they start to get more of that reward, and by giving. So the child suddenly feeds the mother, and the mother is moved in her heart and laughs, and the child realizes the mother misunderstands. I was just playing, but she's so. She thinks it's serious that I give her the sweet, and the child gives her the sweet eventually, but after a while. And then this is benevolence. So the child has the suspicion of benevolence and gives the mother. So the giving, only humans give. No other animal gives. They feed and such on, but never give. And they realize if you like something, they would never give it away. They would keep it more if you are interested.
And that is dangerous. Sharing is dangerous.
Only humans share. And if you know this structure of the smile, you can treat autism. autism are people who are smile blind.
Yeah.
They look at the face. They are not realized that the smile means anything.
Correct.
They
can't interpret it. No?
Exactly.
No.
But I once watched a movie, a report, where a hairdresser, a person who works in a hairdresser shop, talked about how he had been an autistic child when he walked with his parents at the strand, at the sea, near the sea. He was just looking at the shadow of their parents in the sand, his parents in the sand, how the shape changed. Had no interest in the persons. But when he was 7 years old, he was sitting on his mother's lap, and she was showing him how to write. And whenever he succeeded in writing the right letter, she was acoustically so happy. She was rewarding him in the same way as other people are rewarded by the smile of the mother. And then he lost autism. He was not autistic anymore.
Because he understood.
Yeah. So we can use this as a therapy for autism. No one uses it on the planet. And one can use it as a therapy for the autism of an elephant, of a young elephant. Because animals are autists, by definition. Only humans are non-autistic. But if you know this trick, you can turn an elephant into a more intelligent discussion partner and scientist.
I like your smile theory.
Thank you. You are the first.
I am not a scientist. I'm a journalist.
You are a specialist for non-specialization.
Yeah. Gabriela Schroeder is not a scientist, but a citizen.
And
you, Professor
a nurse. Yeah.
Otto, you are a scientist, but you're not a particle scientist.
Exactly.
Does the CERN staff think we should just all shut up and behave and let them do their stuff and that's it?
Yeah. I'm sure. But I'm not only an amateur particle scientist, I'm also an amateur relativity physicist, and I'm an amateur thermodynamics physicist. I discovered cryodynamics. It can be used to make cheap energy in not in colliders, but in another type of
machines,
big machine, which costs even more than CERN actually. And this machine can be controlled by cryodynamics so that it can safely produce hot plasma fusion.
That sounds good.
But even China is not interested in that at the moment, which shows to me that China is much closer to Western thinking than people think, because they even don't believe big progress if CERN doesn't believe it.
That's a good point.
But CERN doesn't know about this. Yeah.
That's a good point. Yeah.
But now I said enough crazy things.
One point I wanted to make is I've in preparation of this interview, I've read a bit of articles and other stuff, and also looked at your German Wikipedia page about you, and it says there that you're in a major legal dispute with this university visiting since over 20 years. And I was quite surprised what such a paragraph would do in Wikipedia. I mean, it would be like they would write something about me in Wikipedia, which I'm luckily not yet have a page for me, and they would say, when he was 10 years old, he stole a piece of bread from somewhere, or he drove without a ticket in the bus. I mean, do you have an idea why somebody could be interested in putting such information in Wikipedia?
Yeah, I mean, one is helpless against any information that is distributed.
Yeah.
And no, I mean, I would be grateful if someone could remove it, but that's all that I can reply. It is not true. Also, it is not true that I ever did anything illegal, but it is true that the Minister of Science of this local government here, Baden-Württemberg, ordered me to go into a closed psychiatric clinic, and I refused. And I never went there, but I had to wait at home once, because the newspaper said this today on that day they will come to fetch you. And a colleague of mine had gone there, and he's later committed suicide. And it was because new laws had been introduced in Germany.
This is actually a very sad subject. I mean, because we talked about this when we had the break in this interview about how society tries to place people that they see as critical of something they don't want to be criticized in institutions like that.
Yeah, but at that time I hadn't criticized anything, strangely. Only there was a new law which said that professors can be forced to change their field for which they had been gotten a so-called call, as it was called. So being uncalled and getting a new call against your will. And this happened to me, and I didn't say no. I just said yes, if I have to, I do it, but I tell the students. And because I told the students that this was an involuntary lecture in a field which I had never studied and had never published in, it would be an experiment we do together. And I said, we will fly this plane, which I had never flown, and we will land this plane, which means I will also take the exams I have to take from you, but together we can do it. And then they took it away. So I was not allowed to make this experiment, which I would have enjoyed, even though it took a lot of nerves, to be so honest. But that was the reason I was declared an enemy of the state.
Yes. Yes. Otto, if you could have a wish concerning the CERN LHC, what would you wish for right now?
I'm so grateful for you to ask this question. You see, usually only angels do that.
I don't know if I am.
Who knows? That I may be allowed to give this talk before the CERN young scientists.
Okay. Well, I wish for that too, Otto, and I thank you very much for that interview.
I appreciate very much the kind atmosphere in which you imbued me, so that I made all the mistakes I could possibly make. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you too, Otto. Ich werde jetzt das Mikrofon ausschalten und die Kamera noch so ein bisschen im Logo so.
Drei was?
Ja, sind so wie 3,6.
Ach so, ja?
Ja. Das Zeichen des Teufels, so viele Leute. Also es gibt eine relativ große Symbolik dort drin. Eben, ja, eben gibt es auch Leute, die denken, das muss als CERN sein, eine Art böse Magie oder so. Relativ viele Meinungen. Und auch die zu den Gefahren am CERN, es gibt ja nicht nur die Gefahr, also nicht nur deine Gefahr, die Schwarze Löcher, dann gibt es auch diese Strangelets und was gibt es noch alles? Wie hieß der andere, der Journalist von den USA, der da sagt, es könnte explodieren oder sowas, das war seine Angst.
Louis Sancho?
Nein, nicht der, es war noch ein anderer, wo wir auch so Kontakt hatten eine Zeit lang. Der hat so ich kann mich nicht mehr an den Namen
nicht der Walter Wagner.
Nein. Bin auch nicht mehr sicher, ob er Ami oder England war. Aber der hat dann auch eben gedacht, es könnte explodieren. Und was der Hawkins sagt, ist ja auch nicht genau das Gleiche, oder? Er hat irgendwie das Universum ganz in zweifarbig. Es gibt verschiedene mögliche.